People of Reddit, what was the scariest paranormal experiences you have ever had in your life? I grew up in seriously a haunted house, so it takes a lot for something paranormal to really scare me. I've seen things, heard things. You name it. Startle me, sure. Scare me? Nah. Here's the only time I've ever been actually scared. I lived in an apartment complex about 11 years ago, and other than some terrifyingly large wolf spiders, never heard or saw anything paranormal. Then the old dude who lived across from me had a party one weekend and his brother died. Alcohol poisoning. His body laid there for over 12 hours because everyone thought he was sleeping it off. After he passed, I would occasionally hear some odd sounds, but nothing major. Then one night I was laying in the bed with my toddler waiting for her to go to sleep, and something blocked the light that had been shining into the room from the bathroom. I whipped my head up off the pillow and looked toward the door, and there was a black mass that was loosely in the shape of a person in the doorway. My whole body started tingling and I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment because I was terrified and unsure if it was a real person who had broken in or something paranormal. I popped my eyes back open and it was gone, so I hopped up out of bed and grabbed my shotgun and a couple shells and took off after it. The only door into the apartment still had both locks locked, and the chain was still in place. Windows were closed and locked. I checked under every bed and inside all the closets and didn't find anything. I heard noises again after that, but never saw anything again. I moved a couple of months later when my lease was up. So this happened, I think, 15 or so years ago when my grandfather passed away. In my culture, the dead are cremated, and there are elaborate ceremonies performed. The body carried by people while chanting the name of a Hindu god, Ram, after it has been cleaned, clothed, and some ceremonial colors put on it. I was never very close to my grandfather. I barely remember ever having much to talk with him, but my parents say I used to talk to him a lot as a child. Anyway, when he died, I didn't really know much about him, other than that he was the patriarch of the family and everybody respected him. I was barely 10 years old then and was supposed to stay at an aunt's house. Sneaky that I was, I managed to follow my mother when she left for my grandfather's house, unaware that I was a few steps behind her. Anyway, the ceremony starts. There's a lot of crying and soon 4 people, including my father, my uncles, and someone I cannot now remember, carry the body on top of a structure made of bamboo and wood. They chant throughout the way. Nobody noticed that I was following them. They reach the cemetery. There's a lot of crying and I got bored standing at a distance. It's almost dusk and sit, weirdly, on a nearby platform. I would later come to know that it is sort of a memorial for the deceased. Sometime between all this is happening, I fall asleep. Hours go by, and when I wake up there is no one. Just the last flames burning through pieces of wood. I panic. I look around to see if there's anyone, but there's no one. I start running towards the pyre, hoping perhaps some of my relatives might spot me by the fire and get hold of me. Again, no one. I start crying. I look around to see if I can find my way to the street. Cemetery was on the outskirts of the town, and it was huge to my tiny mind. Rows after rows of those memorials I mentioned earlier. It's almost dark, and I can hear animals howling at a distance. While all this is happening, I have a creepy feeling that I am being watched. It sends a shiver down my spine, and to this I don't remember ever being so shit scared. It was such a dark and nauseating feeling, a sense of impending doom. I cry louder and start running. Little did I know that I was running deeper into the cemetery, farther from the road that would take me home. I reach the edge of the open ground and catch my breath near the tree line. I can hear faint voices coming from beyond the silhouette of the trees in front of me. Perhaps someone might be returning after gathering wood from there. I am again hit with this nauseating feeling, and it's stronger now. To top it all, every time I walk or run it felt like I could hear footsteps, like someone right behind me. I turned around several times yet found no one. I was so afraid at that point that I thought I might die. I took a leap of faith and ran towards the trees. The sound of footsteps behind me grew louder, and it seemed like whoever it was near, almost at arm's length, like they could just reach out and catch hold of me. I am audibly sobbing and shouting for help. There's barely any light, but I remember hearing people in the distance. Suddenly, I'm in a clearing and see there's a community pond with a bathing area. I can see some people in my family, and I ran towards. No matter how loud I tried to cry, there was no sound coming out of my mouth. Finally, An ant saw me and ran towards me. The last thing I remember before fainting is a hand on my shoulder and my body almost freezing on the spot. I was sick for a week after that, had nightmares for years, and in general stopped going to my grandfather's house or even the town. To this day, I find it difficult sleeping in the dark and sometimes wake up with a cold sweat and a creepy feeling on my shoulder like someone was holding on to me. My first house was built in 1913. After moving in, I knew pretty much right away that I wasn't alone because out of the corner of my eye, I would always see movement in the mirror of the built-in china cabinet. I also smoked back then and came out of the bedroom one morning to find the ashtray flipped off the end table onto the floor. Lots of little things kept happening over the years, but I never felt threatened or scared. We, meaning the ghosts/spirits and I, coexisted in the house with no problems. My BF moved in, and after a few years, we got married. I talk about these things and he'd just look at me, never saying too much about any of it. He traveled quite a bit for work, so I was home alone a lot. One night, I was on my computer, listening to music and playing games. Plain as day, I was tapped from behind on the right shoulder 3 times. I screamed and jumped up, turned around, and nothing/no one was there. Scared the crap out of me. I told my now-husband about it, and then he started opening up about the shadows he'd see moving around in my office. He talked about the footsteps he'd hear in the house when he was alone. The tapping on my shoulder happened one other time after that. When we were moving out of the house and it was pretty much empty, I was there alone cleaning and I heard the footsteps he talked about. Whatever or whoever was there started to feel more menacing towards the end of our time there. I loved the house but was pretty glad when we left. When I was a kid, I'd go stay with my parents at their apartment, and one night we saw a really bright and tiny light rush through the living room. Doesn't seem like much, but hang on. Another thing that happened was that my dad said he woke up in the middle of the night once and saw the bedroom door handle just twisting randomly with a shadow underneath the door. Mother was in the same room, of course, and they were the only ones there at the time. They also both mentioned one time that while in the living room they heard something from the kitchen that sounded like all the cabinet doors just randomly slammed, but when they went in there nothing was out of place. Another time they were both asleep and in the bedroom, and they were woken up by a real loud growl that sounded like it was from something right next to them. Mother wouldn't sleep in there afterwards. There was this real creepy thing that happened in the bedroom as well. It had a large closet with a shelf at the top, and my dad said he kept hearing something in there. When he went to check it out, he ended up finding an obituary pamphlet stuck up between the pieces of wood that made up the shelf. Belonged to some lady that had died in the 80s, and this all took place in the 2000s. Place was creepy, and I'd oftentimes get random feelings of dread. Even now, I occasionally have dreams about it, and they're always filled with a feeling of dread. I lived in a haunted apartment 30 years ago. Numerous things happened, and it was never consistent. One night, as I was falling asleep, it felt like someone dropped a 200 pounds weight on the corner of my bed. Both my dog and I jumped out of the bed. There was a long hallway from the living room to the kitchen. My dog was young and had an endless amount of energy. I was sitting on the couch, throwing his Kong down the hallway, and he'd bring it back to me. We do that for a long time. The Kong bounces erratically, and one time he comes back without it. We go into the kitchen, and I'm looking under the tables and on the chairs. I found it sitting upright in a hutch, behind all the photographs. Lastly, I had glass tops hanging from the ceiling, just decorative. I'd been there almost a year, and this never happened before. Every night around 7, one of the tops started swinging, always at the same time. One night I lit a candle and put it near the top to see if there was a draft. As it got close to the top, the flame would decrease. Pull away and the flame would fire back up. The thing that I always think about when I start to second guess what happened. I've lived in several places since then, and nothing like it has ever happened again. If I was crazy, crazy might follow me. Weird things only happened in that apartment. My wife and I like to road trip in the Smoky Mountains. This trip we had visited the home of Sergeant York at Pall Mall, Tennessee, and bought some wine at a local winery near there before going on to Gatlinburg late that night. Every hotel along the strip was full, and we were giving up hope when we came to the next to last one. We always fly by the seat of our pants on road trips, and I was beginning to think it backfired on us this time, and we would have to sleep miles out in a fleabag place. I was worried and tired. The Riverhouse Motor Lodge was just the other side of the Pigeon River and long. Lots of rooms. But when I went to the front desk, the high school-looking young man said there were none left. I was defeated looking, I'm sure. As I turned to leave, he hesitantly said, "Well, there is one." Yes, anything, I told him. I was thinking it was some overpriced suite, but it was actually a decent price. He pulled the old-fashioned metal key down and gave it to me, and I was so relieved. Happy to pay. Room 237 was on the top floor, a few rooms from the very end, and it was big. Double queens, a huge fireplace, and a balcony. The decor was 1970s. Green shag carpet, Sears paintings, quilted coverlets. It looked like it had never been updated since the place was built. It was great for a couple who teamed in that period. We ate cheese and drank wine on the balcony to the gurgle of the river. We even fed the trout with crackers and left cheese on the rail for squirrels, but it was early November and cold, so we went inside to sit on the large flat stone hearth in front of the fire. One thing led to another, and we did what that hearth was likely made so large for. After one round there, we went for another round on the bed. We love each other very much and very passionately. 2 bottles of wine had made us drowsy, so it was only natural to fall asleep in each other's arms. Just as I was going under, I felt the bed sink behind me, and my wife crawl against my back to spoon me from behind. She was ice cold. I could feel her nipples like cold nickels against my back. WTF? I was almost asleep. Did she come in from the balcony? We had both stopped smoking at that time, so there was no reason for her to be out there. I was annoyed and about to grumble about it when I realized she was sound asleep, warm, and curled to my front. I was fully awake then and sitting up staring into the shadows of the room. That wasn't good enough, so I got up and checked under the beds and the bathroom, as well as the lock on the door and balcony. What else could I do? It had to be a dream. One of those lucid things. I had never had one, but I had heard they seem really real. After around 45 minutes of flickering firelight and wind noise outside, I drifted off to sleep again. I woke up an hour later freezing. There was no cover on the bed. None. I looked to one side. Nothing. The other? Nothing. The end of the bed? Nothing. I couldn't have wakened in a Kansas cornfield and been more puzzled. It had to be somewhere. I got up and searched the room. Nothing. I went into the bath. Nothing. I looked behind the shower curtain. Nothing. I went over every corner and cabinet. I even unlocked and looked on the balcony and over the edge in case my wife had sleepwalked and thrown them over for some crazy reason. Nothing. All I could think to do was go back inside and take the covers off the other bed and use those. As I was walking to the bed, I noticed one corner of the comforter peeking from under the bed. They were stuffed under it. Why? What would make? How? My wife was solid asleep. I hadn't been able to wake her to even ask about it. I covered the bed again and crawled back in. I was concerned and made sure she was breathing okay. What else could I do but go back to sleep? It was 1 a.m. An hour later, I awoke freezing again. This time I knew where to look, but that didn't exactly make me feel better. It was as if it was hearing my thoughts and said, "Don't believe the first time? How about now?" I got up and made the bed as tight as I could. Hospital corners, the works. You could bounce a quarter off it. I still recall basic training. I stood there and decided that wasn't enough. I built the fire to a roar and stood in front of it. Not knowing what else to do, I said these words aloud. "I know you are lonely, but I have to get some sleep. I'm sorry, but I'm tired. I wish you peace." Then I eased my way under the cover and slept the night undisturbed. The next morning, I told my wife about it. She was amazed she missed it all. There is a picture I took of her gleeful smile sitting on the bed. In the light of day, it was a funny story. I laughed too, but I tempered mine with how I felt that night in the darkened room, firelight playing over everything. She called down for breakfast to be sent up. They told her nobody was supposed to be in that room. Well, there is. Send it. Then she turned to me wide-eyed and mimicked the Twilight Zone theme. Used to work in a skilled nursing facility in the evening shift when all the patients would go to sleep. Had a pretty frail patient who needed maximum assistance due to her dementia. In addition, she was a below-the-knee amputee and was absolutely not capable of donning her prosthesis on her own. Everyone had fallen asleep by my final check. As I sat waiting for the end of shift, one of the doors opens a couple feet for about 10 long seconds and then closes back to a sliver as if someone was peeking out, and I saw a shape, but it was in the darkness, so I couldn't see a definition of a face. More just a round shape, so I assumed it to be a face kind of lower to the ground, as if either child-sized or an elderly person who was pretty bent over. I thought nothing of it because patients, particularly with dementia, will not know how to ask for help, so they'll get out of bed and sneak around frequently. It began to dawn on me as I walked toward that room that it was the patient who has no way to get around without her leg. I got super curious what the F was going on. I was freaking out that she had fallen and dragged herself to the door somehow and thinking of all the paperwork we'd need to do. She was fast asleep, heavy breathing and all, in bed in the same position I left her. There were so many events at this facility where things just had no logical explanation, and it just left me confused more than anything about what I had seen. I used to second-guess myself and explain it away, but there were enough of these experiences in the years I had worked there that I, a general skeptic of the existence of ghosts, could no longer deny the possibility of forces beyond our understanding. Call it ghosts if afterlives or spirits, whatever.